Greetings, everyone. I'm Professor Oliver Kaplan, Director of the Joseph Corbell School's Latin America Center here at the University of Denver. And I'd like to welcome all of our friends of the center for joining us today, and especially our new students at Corbell. We haven't met yet, given the circumstances, but I hope we'll have the chance to soon. Today, we're here to kick off our events for the year with our new speaker series on health and race in the Americas. And as part of the background, this year, we actually reorganized some of our regional studies centers into a new institute called the Institute for Regional and Comparative Studies, or ICRS. And this is a very exciting development for us. It means we're sharing resources and collaborating across regions. So we're really excited about this. We have a new website for both the Latin America Center and for the ICRS Institute, and this will be sent out shortly. Now, just briefly, I want to talk about why this series on health and race in the Americas. Well, it's a little bit obvious that these are the kinds of issues that the planet, and especially the United States here, have been dealing with around the world. And I would say, you know, if 2020 has taught us anything, it's clear that we have a lot to learn from other parts of the world. And so we're trying to bring in Latin American perspectives on these issues to exchange ideas and to benefit from them. Our speaker series is online for now, given the circumstances. So unfortunately, we can't meet in person, but it does mean we're able to get some great speakers from the region as we have today. And before I continue, I just want to point out that our colleague, Professor Rebecca Galemba, who directed our center last year, isn't actually standing behind me. And that's one, because we're online, and secondly, because she's enjoying her sabbatical year. And so that said, we also send our congratulations to Dr. Galemba for receiving her tenure and promotion this year to associate professor. So congratulations to you, Rebecca. And I'd also like to say thank you to all the staff who helped make this event possible: Gina Janone, Christine Marchetta, Brian Guzman, and Rose Quispe. All of them have helped at the Latin America Center and the ICROS Center for making the event possible. And I'd also like to thank our institutional support from the DT Institute for supporting ICROS in these events. So now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Doctora Professora Diana Senior-Angulo. It's a real pleasure to introduce Diana, and I'll briefly just go over her biography. Dr. Senior-Angulo is an associate professor of contemporary history in the School of Humanities at the University of Costa Rica. She is the author of the book Ciudadanía afrocostarricense, a gran escenario comprendido entre 1927 y 1963, or in English, Afro-Costa Rican Citizenship, the Great Stage between 1927 and 1963. She's also the co-host of the YouTube channel Aportes Afrocostarricenses y Diaspóricos. Professor Senior-Angulo has a PhD in contemporary history from the Université Sorbonne Nouvelle Paris, a BA in political science, and an MS in history from the University of Costa Rica. She's also in Costa Rica a member of the subcommittee on access to justice for people of African descent of the judicial branch. She is also part of the research network called Connected Worlds, the Caribbean origin of the modern world, otherwise known as Connect Caribbean. And she is also, most interesting perhaps, served as an informal advisor to the president of Costa Rica on Afro-Costa Rican issues. So it's really a pleasure to have Professor Senior-Angulo here today. And I'd also like to just tell a short story before I turn it over to her, which is that it turns out that Diana is actually a very old friend of mine from when I studied abroad in Costa Rica, not so many years ago. And it turned out that we were in, I believe it was a class on US foreign policy and relations with Latin America. And it turned out that I was the only gringo in the class. So this made it very interesting. And I think Professor Senior-Angulo actually took pity on me for that. But for whatever reason, we became friends. And it turns out that we also share a great taste in music as well, and including the calypso and Costa Rican reggae, which I ended up loving. I also will just comment that we had a very interesting professor for that class, and it turned out that he would later become the president of Costa Rica just a few years later. And I'm going to go ahead and say that it was probably because he had Diana and me in his class. And I think Professor Senior-Angulo will agree. So with that, Diana, Professor Senior-Angulo, it's really tuanis mai, as they say in Costa Rica, to have you with us today. So with that, over to you, Diana. We'll have about 30 minutes of presentation, 30 minutes of presentation, and then I have a few initial questions, and then we'll turn it over to the audience for Q&A. So please get your questions ready, and we look forward to those. So with that, thank you, Professor Senior-Angulo.
Wow, thank you, Professor Kaplan. I'm so pleased and honored to be with you guys today. First of all, I want to thank the University of Denver, Professor Kaplan, of course, the School of International Studies, and all the staff, Jean and Christine, Anna, all the people involved in making this happen. I'm going to share my presentation. You're going to see some of the what Professor Kaplan has been saying. I have a little surprise around the presentation called Portraits of Afro-Costarican Citizenship. And then I just want to explain that this presentation is based on my master's thesis, which I defended on, there it is. I defended on 2007, in which initially I was targeting the social incorporation to Costa Rica of Afro Caribbean population during the 20th century, between 1927 and 1963, which are census like boundaries that I used to just develop the arguments and the research in place. And then the Jamaican, the subject matter was the Jamaican, the Panamanian, and Colombian, Afro Caribbean population going through a naturalization process in terms of Costa Rican citizenship between 1927 and 1963. And the reason why I chose these three nationalities is because for the case of Colombian, we have a long history of immigration related to the Caribbean, San Andres and Providencia, before the 1970 immigration from the Caribbean. And the Panamanian is due to the railroad construction during the 1850 and the later canal construction between the migration we had for the railroad in Costa Rica in the 1870s. So all that said, this is important. I have to bring up a map to show the variety of places. Now we understand our countries, but Jamaica was the main part of the Caribbean where the large amount of immigrants came to undertake not only the railroad construction, but the canal, and later on the banana plantation. So we have Jamaica, we have the Bahamas, Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, and some of the islands that were really important in terms of the construction and building of the countries, because at the same time, in the late 19th century, we were in the middle of the construction of the national, not only countries, but the Republican kind of a sphere in terms of nationality and institutionality. So then I have to, because this is a academic presentation, I had to come with a theoretical conceptual frame just to understand how this population, this diverse population, was conceived and received in Costa Rica specifically. I have another research for the Central America region, so that's why sometimes I go back and forth with Costa Rica and the rest of the isthmus. So we have this hybridity and menace that the population in the beginning was facing for the rest, not only for them, for the rest of the country that was hosting them. They were from different islands and they were perceived as a menace in terms of job positions and the national identity that was in terms of building. of course, as foreigners, but the naturalization process they have to go through, and these belonging feelings that they have to leave behind the Caribbean culture in a certain extent to just adopt what the Costa Rican culture was about to bring them. And this sense of border, territory, speciality, geography, and then the social exclusion that was built in terms of the enclave or the operations of the United Fruit Company later in Limon that made this zone of exception, but just so a part of what the rest of the national dynamics were all about. And then we have the national constitution, the social citizenship, this sense of membership and this legal and social institutional frame that later on was built in terms to bring all the people together and realize that they were part of the country and they were now going to be incorporated in a different kind of level. So for those of you who doesn't know Costa Rica, this is a map of the province of Limon. You have here the center, like the head of the province, and then two other major, or four other major points in the geography of the province that, but especially all the population were migrated to Limon, and then they moved along the railroad construction. I'm going to show you another map later. And just to get inside of the context, the historical background is really short. In 25th September 1502, Colon arrives to Uvita, the island in Limon, Costa Rica. And we had just recently, 2003, this musical arrangement to celebrate Limon as a province. Because Colon baptized the country just by watching the province of Limon. So that's something that is really important in terms of identity and national understanding, but sometimes it's forgotten inside of what the social dynamics are bringing to us. So Costa Rica, I don't know if you guys know a little bit of Spanish, but four ethnies, the Black, the whites, the Indians, and also the Chinese, that are the main core of the ethnicity and, you know, the racial, so to speak, diversity that it's all about in this, not only Limon, but the rest of the country. So just to go a little bit further, I had 4 chapters. I'm going to give you a glimpse of the 4 chapters that my thesis became a book. So the origins, confirmation, establishment of the Afro Caribbean population in Limon, Costa Rica. As I said, the majority of the population that migrated were Jamaican. There was a new local dynamics in terms of demography. There were more women, more children migrating by themselves, or that just were born here in Costa Rica. Then you have the economic, the agriculture, the banana plantations, the political. Limon was not a province and became a province because of the demographic density, the social cultural sphere in terms of English schools, that's the name. The Protestant religiosity, the union groups like the Artisans and Laborers Union in 1910, the UNIA, maybe you have heard about Marcus Garvey. He worked in Limon, coincidentally in 1910, went back to Jamaica, and then he founded the UNIA, came back, and it was founded here in 1919. So it has over 100 years nonstop organizational work down in Limon. And the lodges, there are some other kind of organizations that have an important role in terms of cultural bonding. Then we have Black passivity myth that was a very over known and overspread kind of myth that doesn't have anything to do with the strikes and the organizations that went long before this idea of people just resting and having no interest of what was going on not only in the province, but in the rest of the country. And we have this racial conflict height in 1924-25. It was in terms of economic, but it was targeted in terms of racial stratification. The political elites were exclusionists in this way of understanding discursively the role of the Afro-Caribbeans in the country. And I want to show you a little bit of the portraits, actually, of what the Afro-Caribbean, in terms of becoming Afro-Costa Ricans, have to do. So the education, that's a view of it's a group of children attending government school in Limon. All these buildings are gone. We have a very strange policy of patrimonial preserving, so there's not much preserved. But this picture gives a glimpse of the amount of children going to schools, and then how this idea of learning the language was important in terms of a country where the main language was Spanish. Religion and spirituality, we have the Protestant cults and churches that, along with the education, had an important role in terms of bringing together the community and showing how it was important to pass the cultural understanding of their origins, but also how to keep it together in terms of when the time became harsh. This map just gives us an idea of the situation of Costa Rica in terms of Panama and the rest of the Central America region, and how in this sense we have different ports of immigration. This is gonna be important. Colón, Cabezas, Cortés, and Barrios is gonna be ports of displacement, where the laborers start moving back and forth looking for jobs and economical positions. So when we reach the chapter 2, the convulsed decade of the 30s and the 40s, we have this major strike in 1934 that where the Afro-Costa Ricans have a scarce direct participation, but where they became the most harmed with the aftermath. So there was a bunch of 100 Afro-Costa Ricans asking or petitioning not only the company but the government to not passing the ban of colored people, so to speak, getting contract in the Pacific new operations. But we have the reality at the end show up that they weren't able, even though they were Afro-Costa Ricans, they were citizens of the country, they couldn't go and work at the Pacific coast. And then we have Leon Cortés was first a minister of government, then he became president of the country. He negotiated in 1934 this contract. And as president in 1936, he recovered this racial legislation that we have to make it in this comparative studies, think about what was going on in the US with the banning of certain groups or populations to enter the country. So not only Costa Rica, but the rest of Latin American countries were copying these kind of policies. And in terms of the Costa Rican background, the anti-Black policies were more enforced than not anti-foreigners. So these white, in the case of the people that live in Limon, society supported the bannings, but especially the segregation in terms of hotels, the municipal pool. There was a ban for or against Black people, deportations, property titles disputes where population had their titles. They could have groceries and things grow from the land, but they couldn't have the property as well as the being owners of their own products and their own land. And then we have Rafael Calderon Guardia, that during the World War II, World War II, he had this labor code enforcing that 90% of Costa Ricans were to be contracted in different institutions. And in terms of the banana company, only the 40% were for Blacks, where we have a majority, a much larger of Afro-Caribbean people working. Well, the corollary of this government abandonment and its manifestation at the social context, well, demographically, Limon started to get depopulated. It was unemployment, there were migrations, of course, absence of infrastructure, because everything that was built there was because of the United Fruit Company. And then in 1942, for the first time, this government, the color and Warriors government, passed a legal prohibition for Blacks to migrate to Costa Rica. So with this scenario, you can imagine that the situation was really complicated for the people who rested in the province. This is a newspaper where that is not run by Afro-Caribbeans, because there were two kind of newspapers run by Afro-Caribbeans in Spanish and English, but this one is really was a communist newspaper, and they were acknowledging the harsh conditions where which the Afro-Caribbean population, especially the workers, were facing in terms of their social legal status in the country. And the other picture is just to show maybe the distress and the feeling of not feeling from the country, or not feeling this bond with the land, and not even having the bond with the land where their ancestors were born. So it was really hard, especially for people that doesn't have any kind of retirement to face their elder years. So for the chapter 3, in terms of laws and measures ruling the Afro-Caribbean naturalization processes, it had to be said that for the Afro-Caribbean, there was at the beginning indifference, because thinking about going to a place or a country where it was a few years or decades independent from Spain, but they were, British subjects. So they have a monarchy in terms of political status, and they felt over. They were over the rest of the population here in Costa Rica. So there was a lot of indifference at the beginning, but with the temporary employment, it became a permanent resident. So that sort of indifference changed over the time. And with the labor immigrations, starting from the 19th century, and I have just shown it in a brief way, there was a selective criterion in terms of eugenetics in these immigration matters. I have several laws that started with the 62, 69. The 1871 was a constitution which established that the offspring of foreigners born in Costa Rica remain foreigners. So that was the reason why this population in a large scale had to go through the naturalization process. And between the series of measures, we have these consular authorities not processing passport applications without birth certificates, which were very complicated to have if, just which I have explained, they don't have birth certificates declaring the exact and precise place of birth, and then the foreigners paying higher amounts just to be able to enter through the national sports and the national ports and everything. So that was a very complicated time. And the paradox of the government policies at that time was the defense, and that's going to sound familiar, defense of national interest in face of the foreign, or they were placing it in terms of nationality interest. But in reality, the policies were against the cultural Afro-Caribbean opposition. That was in terms of race, actually, towards the Costa Ricans, hindering or impeding the entrance, permanence, and internal displacements of the Afro-Caribbeans. this is another newspaper column about the project and the reforms about the immigration law that was in the National Assembly. This is another one urging the people to go and get their ID, their cedula, the residence, and not exposing themselves to fines. And then we have this one that makes me laugh. It's really sort of dramatic because there are people spreading fear in San Jose, in the capital of the country, saying that there were like 4,000 Black people living in San Jose. And I'm not going through the census and the numbers, but from that 4,000, Black people, there was like 700 just in San Jose. So Limon is thinking, the Costa Rican nationality, is human values, this is getting, disintegrating, and then this is Spanglish, but it's really funny. To the scream of no more Atlantic coast, let us go that good old San Jose, where life is sweet and women, we eat, okay? Masas enteras is like a bunch of huge amounts of people, families going, Afro Caribbean families going to San Jose, definitely. And that was a huge lie, but that had this impact in terms of the imaginary of the country, saying we don't want Black people in San Jose. And we don't want it to move from or move outside Limon, where they're supposed to live. So you can imagine that in that sense, there were a lot of social organizations taking action just to provide a better situation for themselves and their offspring. This is a picture of the lodges that were really important in the construction of this consciousness in Limon. And the other one is an ad of the newspaper announcing the Afro-Costarican Cultural Center that was based in San Jose. In San Jose, there was a myth that there were no Blacks in San Jose. I just told you there were like 700. And from 15,000, more or less, in 1950, there was a reduction, because in 1927, there was over 18,000 Afro-Caribbean people in Costa Rica. So we have a lot of people there that at the end, at that moment, one of these people became the first national deputy of Costa Rican. And from that moment on, we have a lot of people that became relevant in terms of political action and participation. And now we move to chapter 4, the social insertion of the Afro-Caribbean population through the naturalization. We have this fundamental myth in terms of the origin of Costa Rica after the Civil War in 1948, which gave us this social democracy, and where it was said that Figueres, the guy that is in the picture with his wife, gave us, the Afro-Caribbean and women, that citizenship. So the reality is that the Afro-Caribbean were organized way before the 1948, especially the 1949 political constitution, that is where the citizenship was opened. And the women, they have a female league that were struggling since the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century in terms of civil rights. There's another interesting thing about Jose Figueres. He was a naturalized Costa Rican. He was born in Costa Rica, but his parents were from Spain, from Barcelona. So he was a Catalan. And he was naturalized 3 years after Alex Cullen, the one I'm going to show you, was the first Afro-Costa Rican deputy, national deputy. And his first wife that just passed away a few, I think, days ago, weeks. Henrietta Boggs, she was a US citizen. And I just watched a little clip about how they met. And she passed away, it seems to be because of COVID, but she had 102 years, and she was she was from Alabama, the south of the United States, and she was aware of this racial situation in the United States. So it is supposed, allegedly, she has such an important role in terms of bringing Afro-Caribbean and bringing female into the national citizenship situation. This is a little piece of newspaper color Costa Ricans organizing. From this, there's a lot of more things going on. And here it is, Mr. Alex Curlin, Honorable Alex Curlin Delicer, who became close to Figueres. Because Figueres had this ability to speak English, so he went to Limon, speaking English to the community. He just, everybody fell in love with him, and especially because he shared this naturalization process and some other things that he very political, he wisely used it just to bring the people together, the Afro-Caribbeans. And this crystallized in 1953, becoming the first deputy, with this openness, this new space of participation, and him from this position and this awareness campaign that he and other people established, he was able to support the rights of Afro-Costa Rican citizens and provide for them this legal place that was so neglected in the past. So for that reason, and due to his political work, he was honored as father of legal equality of the country. We have a special name in Spanish, is Benemérito de la Patria. I don't know how to translate that, but it's like father of the legal equality of the country. That's the other title that he has. Some other bunch of newspapers. There was a lot of newspapers I went through about Limonense. Limonense, you have to read about this law that is about your future, study, keep it in close to your interests, because it's going to be a major thing going on later on. And about the West Indian, as he or as they are affected by Costa Rican prosperity or adversity. That means that if the males, Afro-Caribbean males, had to start migrating in the 20s and 30s because there was scarce labor opportunities, women had to do the same around 1950, 1960s. The majority of females went to United States. So for this first phase of, Afro-Costa Rican citizenship, with the naturalization in their hands, the Afro-Costa Rican population will continue towards citizenship, and was a complex, it's evident that it was a complex process of continued redefinition, whose dynamics were in constant negotiation. With this hybridity their population had, this was a bifurcation between the already known Afro-Caribbean cultural identity elements with the most novel Costa Rican elements. So the white prescription, there was this idea that Costa Rica from all the Central America was the only white country. There's a big lie, but this white prescription of Costa Rican national citizenship as a criteria of cultural admissibility did not change with the new Afro-Costa Rican membership. So there was a lot of things going on. The Constitution, the laws enforced by Curlin, but the rest of the country still had this idea of being a white country. So the identity context of Afro-Costa Rican social incorporation remained intact in that sense, in the face of this cultural difference they entailed. Just a little about value, reputation, respectability. They're important in terms of the family and how the Afro Caribbean start moving from this idea of the Caribbean culture to the Afro-Costa Rican, and providing for their kids and their families, extended family as well. And thinking about distinguished political representative, we have Jocelyn Sawyers. She's now retired. She was an educator, deputy. She was in facing the initiative of the Mauritius distinction to Alex Query as father. Okay, there's the word, meritorious distinction, okay? That was Benemerito La Patria. As father of the homeland, promoter of the constitutional change, introduced to the Article 1 that says that Costa Rica is a multicultural and pretty diverse country. That happened in 2015. And it's very recent. We are late in terms of multicultural, the multicultural turning point. And Epsi Campbell is an activist, well, used to be an activist, but deputy, and now is the first Afro and now vice president from Costa Rica, but of Central America region, is the second for the Latin America and Caribbean region. The first one is from Guyana. And this is just a picture of, in the middle, I don't know if you can see my, in the middle here is Luis Guillermo Solis, that Professor Kaplan mentioned without name. He was our professor, and he became president of the country. And he was the one, the first president that gave a big room and space to the Afro-Costa Rican population to enter the Casa Presidencial, the presidential house, and being there in terms of policies and doing the best, not only for Limon, for people in San Jose and the rest of the country, because the Afro-Costa Ricans are all around the country, especially mainly in San Jose and surroundings, and then the rest of the country. So we have some leaders here. He's from the UNIA. He's the president of the UNIA. She was the head of it's called Mesa Nacional. It's like the head of Afro-Costa Ricans caucus, so to speak. She was a major in ICRS. This is a part of Limon as well. And this is an empiric historian, very well known in Limon. And this is another picture. This is the very first time that you can see a picture with, these emblems of Costa Rican government and United Nations with all Black people, all Afro-Costa Ricans. And we have several leaders here from musical sphere, English teachers. She now is the minister for, let's say, welfare. It's not the same as the United States, but it's something like that have to do with lottery. Queens Duncan, that was the first, comisionado, who was the head of Afro-Costa Rican Affairs. Then we have, she was the first female deputy, and she is, and these two are Alex Cooling's daughters. She's her daughter as well, so she is the grandchild of Alex Cooling. And then we have some other people. He was deputy of the country. He was deputy of the country as well. Well, there's a lot of people, and she was a major in Limon as well. So now this is a picture of, well, you can recognize this is me. This is a friend of mine from Morocco that I met him when I did my PhD in France. She was visiting me around the August 31st. We have this special day. We have the month, the Afro-Costa Rican month in August. So the last day, the 31st, we have this, it used to be only the day of Afro-Costa Ricans. Now we have a whole month. And that day, I had the opportunity to give my book to the president. that was my teacher and my professor, and he actually was an advisor to my thesis as well. So the thing is that I got my book in 2011, a week before entering, going to France. So I couldn't make it, presentation, and I got the opportunity to give this to him in 2015. I think it was 15 or 16. And just to say that he was the last, because we have another president now, and he's the last president that has been so close to the community. Actually, he always remedicated the fact that he has Afro Caribbean blood. The side of his mother, that was true, wasn't a lie. And that's why he has this sensibility or empathy. I don't know how to put it in which terms, but he understood that it was important to address and give a better place to the Afro-Caribbeans and Afro-Costa Ricans after so many years of residing and building economically, politically, socially, culturally, etc. to this country. The first lady, sorry. And this is another guy that's used to study political science. I don't know if Professor Kaplan recall him, but he was in charge of something, of an important institution in Limon. So the social incorporation of the Afro-Costa Rican population into this national life of Costa Rica came after a long process in which, on the one hand, despite racism, they managed to dissociate themselves from their association with the transnational, as well as from their foreign status, while in the other hand, they enter the economic, social, political, cultural spaces of national life protected by the Constitution as part of this assimilation that sustained the construction of their citizenship in the country, a process still unfinished, but by the nature of their conditions seeks to rely more and more on the basis of social equity and justice. I said that in 2007, and it's so relevant today. Thank you.
I'm going to come back on here. Thank you so much, Professor Senior-Angulo, for this wonderful presentation. Really fantastic.
Thank you.
I thought the pictures and maps were great. The really impressive archival work to dig up those old newspapers from the period. And for me at least, I think it provides a much clearer picture of the exclusion and process of inclusion of the Afro-Costa Rican population over time. And that's something that I have to say I knew some of as a part-time resident of Costa Rica, but wasn't really exposed to. So I really appreciated that. And I'll just comment that, listening to you speak, there just seem to be so many parallels from Costa Rica that we're seeing play out, today in the US, from activism, the histories of segregation, these immigration restrictions that we've seen, and even, more concerningly in this political campaign, the rhetoric about suburbs and discrimination and unfounded fears about different types of people moving into different communities that we see now in other countries as well. So I thought just such an important overview. With that, I know we do have some questions and comments coming in. I would encourage everybody who has a question, please pop it into the chat box, and we can go and address them. We're maybe a little bit behind time, so we might go a little over time, but I think we should be good. I know there was a first question about your book, Diana, and where people can find it. And I saw that there are some used copies on Amazon.com, which might be the easiest place for people in the US to get it. Is there another place that you recommend? We can maybe send that out later, or?
By now, only by Amazon, because it's complicated. Okay. It's just printed. It's going to be in a digital format, but I think Amazon is going to be good.
Okay, and from what I understand from some of our conversations, you're working on the English translation, which we can look forward to before long. So yeah,
but that's from the PhD.
Okay, so it's a slightly different.
That's going to be bilingual.
But okay, yes. Okay, wonderful. Well, I do have just two brief questions I'd like to start off with, and then we can open it up. And the first question that I would like to ask you, and we talked about this a little bit before, but it really came through in your presentation, is really this long history of international networking and transnational activism, from Marcus Garvey and the UNIA to this wonderful story you told us about Henrietta Boggs. And I know you've been a part of this transnational network and activism as well. And I wonder, today in the US, especially this summer, but certainly for a number of years, the Black Lives Matter movement, BLM, has been extremely influential and consequential. And I wonder how this is playing out in Costa Rica and Central America and Latin America. Are there transnational ties that are developing? Are there similar issues that you're dealing with? If you could just sort of give us your view of the situation and the networking.
Yeah, in terms of the Black Lives Movement, we have, for the George Floyd case, a virtual march that happened a few days later, and there was like 1,000 people connected to this organization. Is called Costa Rica Afro. It's called like that. And they have, they're being related to what's going on not only in Costa Rica, but Central America, specifically in Colombia, because we have this racial profilement and criminal, kind of persecution of Black people, especially if they are leaders. So there was several deaths of young people in Colombia. So, and we started to link what was going on in Colombia, what was going on in Brazil. You all guys know about Mariel Franco, some other leaders that have been important, relevant in terms of addressing equity and social justice, racial justice in case of, to be more understandable in the US terms. And how these movements have been, related to what's going on in United States. Actually, in our channel, because I have a channel with another historian, we have one interview about the Black Lives Matter. It's in English, so if you're interested, you can get further information. It's very, very good. This professor gives a whole background of what's going on in the US and what's going on here in Costa Rica.
And so that's the Aportes Afrocostarricenses y Diaspóricos YouTube channel. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Why don't I see there are a few questions so in the chat. So I put a link to the book in the chat, and I'll put in the YouTube channel, at least the name of it, so people can follow it. I'm not sure this will be. Oh yeah, here's someone asked a question about a website where they can follow your work. So why don't I just pop the name of this in there? And I think the rest of your work is available either on Google Scholar, or
exactly.
People can reach out to you directly over email or something if they have questions, I'm guessing.
Yeah, sure.
So, yeah, well, thank you for that answer. I mean, really, really interesting, the connections being made and some of the momentous, events happening here in the US and, playing back to Costa Rica, and I'm sure, building additional solidarity networks as well. The other very brief question I wanted to ask you, and as you know, I'm a huge fan of the Afro-Costa Rican calypso, the reggae, and all the Latin spin that they put on those genres of music. And I was wondering, sort of from maybe a more fun and light side of this, I know that the Afro-Costa Rican music has had such a big impact in the country and sort of had an influence, a broader influence beyond just the region on the Caribbean, the Limon region. And, can you say just a bit about, how is that affecting how people, the strength of the Afro-Costa Rican identity, and what role that plays in the community, what role it plays in terms of integration, if you will, or contact with the broader society?
Yeah, in terms of music, it is true that it's really important way to bring people together. And when we talk about Calypso in former years, it was, we couldn't even imagine that it was going to become a national rhythm. It's part of the folklore, as well as the rice and beans that is displayed is very typical from Afro Caribbean and from Limon, but now it's national. So this kind of recognition in terms of the cultural identity, it's a way to understand the diversity that we are part of. And the music, you can see and look more about Walter Ferguson, that now is like a rock star. He is very well known in Latin America. There have been like two CDs that have been released later or recently about his music done featuring different artists from all around the world, Africa, South America, Central America, and it's the Caribbean. And this is a way to bringing people together, understanding that when he sings about this situation with the cacao, the production in Limon, and how it became go down, how this can relate to people in Africa, how this can relate to people in the Caribbean, about the situation of getting employed or getting unemployed, all these kind of things that seems to be so universal. It can be addressed and shared and also understood by people from different backgrounds. So that's the magic of the music. And I feel that in different languages as well, not only Spanish, but English, but Portuguese, it's amazing. It's amazing. Yeah. And he's 102 years now. And he has a national day. We have now a national Calypso Day. Can you believe that? And he is a recognized citizen of the country. So we have advanced. I am very positive about what we have been doing the last years.
Well, I remember one of your parting gifts to me was a mixtape of some great Walter Ferguson songs and other songs, and I loved it. And you know, I realized, or I recently saw a news article, I think it was in The Guardian, about Walter Ferguson. So he's truly gone international. And one of the things they said was that he never really released albums because he just played, you know, in the region and played for people. But what he would do was just anyone who wanted to hear him play, he would just sit down and record a tape for them. And now there's a campaign to try to find all the tapes that he recorded for random tourists and just people from the area to try to compile his music. So just really fascinating story. With that, why don't we see if there are some, I'm not sure if there's some questions, or there are some questions here coming in. Let me see if we can get the chat going. So maybe I'll just read these to you, Diana, and you can you can answer, and we'll see how many we can get through. Here's a question from Anna. So it's sort of a related question, but I think a slightly different spin on it. How aware were Afro-Caribbean activists and organizations of the dynamics of the civil rights movement in the US? And were there echoes of that in Costa Rican society? So how did that sort of, maybe I'm assuming she's referring to sort of the period of the 60s especially, but how did that, you know, influence Costa Rica at all?
That is a fascinating question, and I can go, this is another, it's another conference, but I will have to say that the Malcolm X and Martin Luther King movement has a, you know, a force. It was amazing what happened in Central America, not in Costa Rica, because I went through all the region looking at newspapers of that time, and there was a lot of references related to what was going on in the U.S., especially because Afro-Caribbean in the region were citizens, and Black people in the U.S. were not recognized. They still, you know, in terms of segregation laws. So they have this mirroring thing going on of relating to what was going down there, and how, because segregation was different in the region, especially in Panama was the strongest, and in Honduras. I even found a KKK cell in going on in Honduras.
Wow.
And the rest of the, yes. So it's interesting how the news and circulated in terms of what was going on in the U.S. and how people here in the region and the country organized in terms of providing themselves the civil rights they deserve. Mm-hmm.
Great, great question and great answer. We have a second question. It's from Professor Alejandro Cerón from our anthropology department. Hello, Alejandro. It's in Spanish, so I'll read it in Spanish and then I'll do my best to not butcher the translation in English. But the question is, ¿cuáles son los puntos de alianza entre el movimiento afro-caribeño y otros movimientos sociales en Costa Rica, como mujeres, indígenas, trabajadores, etcétera? Or what are the possible alliances of the Afro Caribbean movement and other social movements in Colombia? So women's movements, indigenous movements, workers, etc. Is there sort of collaboration, networking? How do the social networks interact with each other?
Yeah. Hola, Alejandro. Okay, thank you. It's amazing. It's an amazing question. Right now, we have a particular situation going on. Actually, you know, Yanane Villanueva is a very well-known journalist. It's like Amandur, something like that in United States.
My former internship advisor, we must remember.
Yeah. So I have an interview tomorrow because we're going through an economical crisis, not due to pandemics, but due to a lot of things going on that have been addressed properly in terms of political and economical ways. So right now, if we have to address something as, you know, where we can relate as groups, we have to think about the unemployment, so generating more employment for the people, bettering the economic situation. The education is fine right now, but it can improve. And in terms of what is going on in Limon, especially the indigenous and the Afro-Costa Ricans, but still with women and other small enterprises that are going through a very harsh situation. So the economic is the base right now of getting people together, but we understand that these days is becoming a little bit more in the political manifestation and the sort of demands that we're trying to make the government understand that it's important to address right now. So the economic and then the political situation in terms of human rights, especially. So we have the LGBT movement, we have women, and we have Afro-descendants, we have indigenous, migrants. Okay, we have a bunch of different groups coming together in terms of this kind of issue.
Interesting. So a lot of intersectional organizing happening.
Exactly. Yeah.
So actually, we do have a question from Professor Aaron Schneider, who is our co-founding director of the Latin America Center, along with me, professor in the Corbell School. And he has a question that's actually it's related to the question asked by Anna, but it's slightly different. And his question is asking not just about links in the 50s and 60s between the US civil rights movement and what's happening in Costa Rica, but were there links between the Costa Rican activists and organizing and other movements in the so-called third world and other countries around the world, not just the US, that were mobilizing?
Hello, Professor. Okay, so in terms of regional movement, I would say in the 60s, 70s, we have this agrarian revolution going on. So what was going on in terms of providing land and providing resources to people who are growing crops, giving the best conditions to, in terms of selling their products. That was a whole new kind of understanding of the place different groups had in the country. So I found from Guatemala to Panama that they were actually very aware of not only their position in terms of the economical, terms of the exchange that were set up at that time, but the possibilities of getting their own without, people in the middle trying to get advantage, but to get the best prices and be part of the economic game in a big way. So that's part of something that has been going on at that time, and also how the women at that time as well were gaining positions in terms of notoriety outside the domestic sphere. So I would say those two were really important at that time.
Great. I think we've actually exhausted the questions for now. So unless there's one other question that I see pop up in the chat, I think we will wrap up. So I want to just express my extreme thanks, Professor Senior-Angulo, for spending some time with us today. This has really been fantastic. And as I sort of reflect overall on what you've been saying, I think a lot of, obviously, the United States and Costa Rica have a very close connection, and a lot of Americans go there to study, for tourism, because everything is beautiful there and the coffee is amazing and all that stuff. But I think, you point out that there's this really important additional history that probably most Americans aren't aware of, that's been going on there if they're just, going straight to the beaches of the rainforest or something. Really important, additional story to Costa Rica that we need to pay attention to. And some of it has a lot of positive aspects, some more troubling aspects to it as well. And so probably with that, I'm guessing that you would suggest people should not only check out the Pacific coast, but also go check out the Caribbean coast, which is a different experience, and also very welcoming. So, so with that, thank you. There's a question that, yes, this recording will be posted online as soon as we have a chance to process it. And so we'll be sure to circulate that. I also just want to flag two upcoming events that we have. The first event is actually happening tomorrow. It's an ICRS event. So it's a region-wide event where we're going to be discussing the Nobel, I'm not going to be on it, but other much more esteemed faculty will be on it, discussing the Nobel Peace Prize, which is supposed to be announced, I believe, tomorrow morning, our time, or maybe tonight. So we'll have some experts online for that, and that information should be available on the ICRS website. And then we have a second Latin America Center event. We have it tentatively scheduled for November 5th at the noon time slot, although we will confirm, and that's with Professor Alejandro Fejed from the Universidad del Rosario in Bogota, Colombia, and he's been studying the effects of coronavirus COVID-19 in Colombia and how to measure that and map it with a bunch of different big data techniques. So we look forward to that. So with that, you can all give me a virtual round of applause for Professor Senior-Angulo, her fantastic presentation.
Thank you.
And we look forward to staying in touch. So thanks everyone for joining. Take care.